Right. Okay. So thanks for the wonderful introduction. So let's get started. So today's topic is developing feedback culture at work. So I'm going to use this word feedback a lot in this presentation. So when I say feedback, please relate that to feedback between peers, peer-to-peer feedback, team feedbacks, and maybe between a manager and an employee or an employee to a manager. So the word feedback refers within the teams, across the teams, as well as between a manager and the team. I hear a lot of echo, so can you please mute? All right, not better now. All right, so let's get started. So what are we going to discuss today? So in this presentation, I'm going to cover why is feedback important. So what are the benefits of having a good feedback culture? So I'll be covering that and how feedback can help to become a high-performing team or to become a self-organized team. How is feedback helping? How exactly it is helping? So I'll be covering that, as well as I'll be talking more about the challenges in giving and receiving feedback. So while we also understand that feedback is important, so what are the challenges in giving and receiving feedback? I'll discuss about that. And then we'll also discuss more about when to give the feedback. So what is the right appropriate time, and then how you identify that, and then how you give that feedback.
Yeah. I'll just interrupt for once. I think we're not seeing the slideshow, so I think we have to give it on the full screen sharing. Yeah.
Yes, I've given it in the full screen sharing.
Okay,
so you can see my slides.
We are seeing the. Okay, it's refreshing. Let's see.
Let me share it again.
Yeah.
It's coming up?
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah, you're on the agenda screen.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right. So, and then we'll see like how to give the feedback and how to receive the feedback. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll share the self-assessment framework, a simple tool that we can use for assessing how our feedback culture is and what are the indicators in that assessment. So that's how we are going to have the session today. And we'll have the Q&A towards the end. Right, so having said that, let me start. So I'll just start with why feedback is important with the Johari window. So what is this Johari window? So if you look at the screen, there are two aspects here, right? So one is the self, the x-axis is the self, right? So from the self, what are the items that we know about the self, ourself, and what are the unknown items for the self? So the x-axis is about knowing the self, and the y-axis is about the items that others know about us and the items that others don't know about that, right? So let's relate from this perspective to see what are the items that we know about us and others don't know, right? So that's how the Johari window is placed. Just quickly run through this so that we can identify how feedback is helping to find the blind spot. The first quadrant is more about the items, the informations about you that you know but others don't know. So that's the private or hidden section. So this is the quadrant that relates towards the information that we know about us, our behaviors, our beliefs, and all those things, but the others don't know, the unknown to others. So this is the first section, it's the hidden self. The second section is the place where the information about you, both you as well as others know. That's more about the public knowledge space. So if you look at what are the things that you know as well as the others know, so this information is like, public we might know, and others also know how we think and how we approach. So all those things are public knowledge. The third important aspect is the blind spot. So what is that blind spot? The information about you that you don't know but others do know. So that's the important spot for feedback, right? So each one of us have this blind spot. What is blind spot? It is the relationship between where information that you don't know about you, your behaviors or your approaches or your actions, but others do know, right? So that's the blind spot. So the feedback helps you to identify the blind spot. So that's how you can relate this with this analogy of the information between the self and between the others. This framework is from Johari, Joseph and Harlington. So they put this out to see how we can relate things between an individual and with the others. So the feedback is very helpful in identifying the blind spot. So what is the blind spot? Blind spot is more about the information about you that you don't know but others do know, So that's the powerful impact that feedback can help you to identify the blind spots. What is the last quadrant about? So this is more about the unknown self. So what is that unknown hidden self? These are the informations about you that neither you nor the other people know about that. Your team members or the people that you interact with. So both these parties are not aware. So that's the hidden self of it. So where is feedback going to be more important? It's going to be important in identifying the blind spot. So first, specific things that we can recognize how feedback helps is to identify the blind spot. So what is the blind spot? Blind spot is the place where informations about you that you are not aware about how people are perceiving it, but other people know how it is. So by giving feedback and receiving feedback, you'll be able to understand the blind spots. Alright, so what are the other informations? What are the other complications when we don't have a good, effective feedback culture? So number one thing that will happen, that will be visibly seen, is the dysfunctions with the teams. Right? So what is dysfunctions within the team? So there are 5 dysfunctions within the team. So Patrick Lencioni kind of covers this in his book, 5 dysfunctions of the team. A very interesting book to understand what are the dysfunctions within the team. To start with, it is absence of trust. So whenever we want to have a good feedback culture, the fundamental thing is trust, right? So one of the dysfunctions is trust. So when we don't have feedback or when we don't have trust, the feedback doesn't come up well. So absence of trust, it's more about not willing to display the vulnerability, not building trust. So that's the first dysfunction. And fear of conflict is the second dysfunction. So when you don't have trust, we don't have that positive conflicts, the candid debates that comes up. So there will be a lack of lack of trust. Puts another dysfunction, fear of conflict. And what happens when you have fear of conflict? So people don't passionately agree or disagree. So what happens is there will be a lack of commitment. And what happens when there is lack of commitment? There will be lack of accountability within the team. So when there is lack of accountability, then probably people will be not attentive towards the results or outcomes. So these are the dysfunctions of the team. And by having a proper feedback culture, you will be able to clearly see what are the dysfunctions, use feedback to correct the dysfunctions. So whenever you don't have the feedback culture well incorporated within the teams and organizations, you can clearly see the dysfunctions visible, and that can put down the performance. The second aspect of it is growth becomes stagnant. When everybody is trying to be nice to each other, not giving that positive, direct, open, candid feedback, the growth becomes stagnant. And you can very well see that everybody might be nice to each other, but the performance of the team or performance of the organization may not go high. But the second reason why we need to have feedback is more about cutting that out from a stagnant growth towards high-performing teams. I'll also connect this feedback towards the high-performing teams in the successive slides from Harvard Business Review. Right? All right. So what are the other aspects on why we need feedback? So third aspect, important aspect of why we need feedback is to bring self-organization and empowerment with the teams. So when we talk about Agile a lot, we always try to refer self-organization, empowerment, self-management teams or Agile teams, right? So when we quote this out, the first fundamental thing that needs to be right with the teams is the feedback culture. So when the peers are comfortable in giving and receiving feedback, and when the culture of feedback is good within the organization, you can definitely see the self-organized, empowered, and self-managed teams organizing, right? So in order to achieve self-organized teams, in order to get to the outcome of empowerment and self-managed teams, feedback is something extremely important, or maybe the first step towards achieving self-organized or empowered or self-managed teams. So that's how feedback helps you, right? So we use these words a lot, the self-organization, self-managed teams in Agile. But in order to be self-organized and empowered, the first step is to fix the feedback culture in the right way. All right, so what are the other areas where how feedback will help? So when the team is having a diverse set of personalities, when we have diverse set of skills, when there is passionate culture of giving and receiving feedback from different set of people with diverse thoughts, you'd be able to unlock the change, unlock the innovation, unlock different thought processes, and develop a good culture of learning. Right. So how does that happen? When there is a diverse set of people within the team, and when they are open enough to share and receive feedback and act on the feedback properly, but particularly when the thoughts are diverse, you can see the new culture of learning. We can be able to learn from each other well, rather than shutting down with what we know. And this confidence level also grows. Why? Because we are open to get different thoughts, and our thoughts are getting vetted with different diverse people from different backgrounds. And when we are open to receive and give feedback, this goes up, right? Our confidence goes up because we have vetted that, and we are open to hear diverse feedbacks. And it also improves the effectiveness as a whole from the team, right? So these are the things when the team is diverse and when they are open for feedback, definitely there will be more learning, and the confidence of the team goes high when they are open enough looking at different thoughts through feedbacks. Right. Last but not the least, when we have a strong feedback culture, there will be strong team engagement. And this is also put from a study, the Harvard Business Review. There's a study, done by Harvard, School of Business, where they examined a lot of teams from the scale of very high-performing teams to teams that are average and below average. So one of the things that they found out from high-performing teams, one of the clear indicator is they were giving and receiving feedback 60% more than the other teams, the other moderate and average teams. So what do you mean by the 60% more feedback? Their culture was good enough to receive feedback more often, direct, open, candid, and more often feedbacks, and they were able to act on it. So one of the key indicators of a good agile team is also high performance, striving for continuous improvements. And when you clearly see like how teams go to that level of high performing, they should be open, and there should be a good feedback culture, which has ability to continuously improve on what they are doing. Right, so the Harvard Business Review also suggests that the teams who are really high performing have this good culture of giving the right feedback and more often feedbacks. So when that happens, then it also builds the trust in the individuals and teams. We saw about the 5 dysfunctions of the team, and how when we don't have feedbacks, how the dysfunctions of trust gets built it up. So it brings that out, and also it has some good constructive discussions towards better outcomes. So when we have open direct feedback, and when we have that trust doing that, the engagement is strong, people can count on each other, and then you can see the outcomes, high performing outcomes coming out evidently. Right, so these are the things behind why we need to have a good feedback culture, and how feedback culture can help us to remove the dysfunctions, to have better growth rather than having a stagnant growth, and then bringing in strong engagement with the teams, and then having diverse thoughts. And when we have diverse people in the teams, and when the feedback culture is good, then there will be definitely a lot of learning, right? So these are the things that why feedback is important, right? So these are all cool. So we understand the importance of feedback and how feedback helps. So now let's see, like, okay, this is nice, but what are the challenges in giving and receiving feedback? Why when somebody calls us for a meeting and then gives a feedback, why is it so difficult for us to receive or give feedback, right? So let's see that. So I'll try to explain that from Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. So what is this Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs? So Maslow did a psychological study in which he portrayed the way that our human brains have evolved. The human needs, how they have evolved across over the time. So the first layer is the physiological layer. It's more about the general needs, basic needs for us, food, shelter, and all those things. So that's the first layer, first need in a human brain that got developed, that has more influence till now. And the second thing is safety and security layers. So safety and security needs, particularly from the job perspective, or from a health perspective, or from a social security, family security, safety. So these are the second most important need that has evolved in the human brains according to Maslow's hierarchy. The third thing is more about love, belonging, collaboration, friendship, sense of connection. So this is the third layer that goes above the safety and security and the basic needs layer. So that's the third layer of brain that got developed. And the fourth layer is self-esteem. So what is that self-esteem? It's more about the needs to get accolades, needs to show the achievements, the respect for others, and showing how we are important in the society, and then calling those parameters out. So that is the self-esteem layer that got developed towards that. Last but not the least, which is still getting developed in the human needs of hierarchy, is the self-actualization. Right. So what is self-actualization? It's more about getting better, the morality, bringing in the purpose, improving the inner potential, and then getting better at what we are doing. So this is more about the self-actualization layer, which is the topmost layer, which is still evolving. So if you look at the influence on these 5 layers within human brains, the influence is more towards the physiological needs and the safety security layer. The bottommost 2 layers, which is formed earlier, still has a significant impact on our human brains, right? So we understood what is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how our human brains have evolved. So how is this connected to feedback? Let's see that. This is a neuroscience study that people have found. So this connects to what and how our brains react when we hear feedback. So what happens when somebody calls us and then gives a bit of feedback, and how does our brain really react? So our brain feels criticism like a threat to our survival. So what it does, it just maps those feedbacks and comments as criticism towards the bottom 2 layers, like safety and security layer and psychological needs layer. Right? Instead of putting at the higher side, more towards the inner potential or towards self-esteem, it puts to the lower side. So what happens when something here hits our safety security layer or the physiological needs layer? We go nuts, right? So we try to run away from that, because whenever there is a safety or security threat, when our brain interprets these criticisms and feedback in that way, we will try to avoid that. That's how our brains are designed, physically designed, right? So that's how we have evolved. Our brains are always protective of us, and then kind of goes out of their way to make sure that we always feel right, and even when we are not, which is, even when the feedbacks are true, and sometimes our brain goes out of the way and then gives a false alarm or map it to the safety and security layer or towards the lower layers instead of trying to map towards the top 2 layers. So this is the neuroscience study that says that. But how do we get away from this way? It's very tough, because that's how our brains are designed. So how do we receive feedback, or while we receive feedback, how do we map this? We have to tell to ourselves, we have to be consciously aware. Whenever somebody gives a feedback to us, we have to be consciously aware that our physiological needs layer and the safety security layer is strong, and then we should tell ourselves, we should be mindful about that. This is more about self-actualization and improving how we do things, rather than treating that as a safety or a security threat, which generally automatically happens. Right? So we should try to bring in some awareness by practice. So this is one of the challenge. This is how our brain tweaks that and then put it to a point.
Ravi, Murugesh here. Participants not able to see the screen. Can you stop sharing and again restart the screen? Yeah.
Okay, so let me know once you're able to see the screens.
Yeah.
All right, something goes wrong, weird. So we had the same problem before, and then now also.
Yeah.
Can you also click on the hide in that thin strap? Yeah.
All right. Okay, so this is just in case if you have not seen during the presentation because of these issues, maybe I'll just put this out. So this is the Maslow's hierarchy that I was talking about. The physiological needs, the safety and security layer, which is bottommost layers, and then when we get a criticism, our brain just maps to this layer instead of the higher layers, right? And then our brain goes out of the way to protect us, and that's how our brains are designed, and that's how our amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, is stronger than our prefrontal cortex. That's the the logical brain, right? So that's why receiving feedback is tough. All right, so what are the other places where people have quoted the challenges in giving and receiving feedback? So Charles Jacob, so he's the author of the book Management Rewired. So it's a very nice book, for people who are in facilitators role, or agile coaches, or scrum masters, or managers, or leaders. I would suggest to go read this book. They talk a lot about how feedback works, and then what are the nuances in giving and receiving feedbacks, and then why feedback doesn't work also. He talks a lot about neuroscience and how our brain really responds or reacts towards the feedbacks. And he also quotes, like, when we hear information that conflicts with our self-image. So every one of us have a self-image, right? So we have a self-image of what we are and what we do, and our instinct is first to change the information when we get feedback rather than changing ourselves. Right, so that's how our brains are designed. So our brain always focus towards the self-image, and we go out of the way to see and modify the information rather than changing ourselves. Right. So he talks more about how that happens in our brains. All right. So what are the other challenges? We saw about the neuroscience, how our brain reacts, how our brains are designed that way, and how to be mindful in doing that. There are also some repercussions and retaliations when we give feedback, right? So what do you mean by repercussion and retaliation? So when I give a feedback, sometimes people remember the negative things that they store, right? So sometimes our brain, as I said, it might put to the lower layers and then remember that as a safety and security threat or a physiological needs threat. And then we inaccurately remember the criticism, but we remember it inaccurately but strongly. So our brains are pretty much designed sometimes towards a negativity bias, and then when there are some things that we miscorrelate and then put it to a negativity bias, we strongly remember that. So what we do when we strongly remember a negative thing, we try to give a repercussion or a retaliation back when we get some time. So this is also a challenge for giving and receiving feedback. So when people feel like they might be getting retaliated or there might be a lot of repercussions, sometimes they might hold back rather than giving the right feedback at the right time. So this is one of the challenge in giving and receiving feedback. What are the other challenges? The fear of feeling judged, right? So yes, I'm open to go and give the feedback. So how would people look at me with my input? So instead of saying that, then probably I might tend to hold back to what I have as a thought or as a feedback. Why? Because sometimes there is a fear of feeling judged, and then we just hold our inputs towards ourselves. So these are the general challenges out, starting from neuroscience, and then how it works within the corporate culture. Sometimes we remember that in a negativity way, and then sometimes we also feel like we might be judged, and then we don't give that feedback upfront. So these are the challenges. So till now, whatever we have seen is, why is feedback important? How it is connected? How does that help? How does that solve the dysfunctions? And then what are the challenges in it? So let me move to the section where when is the right time to give feedback? So I'll just quickly walk through like when all we can give feedback. So first and foremost, when you see like someone is asking for feedback, right? So someone asking you for your feedback on an event, or it could be the things that has recently happened. When somebody calls you for feedback, you can give feedback. That's the first thing. The second is more obvious, like when there is an error, when you see something is repeatedly happening, you clearly see that it's a code error, or it could be something, a behavioral issue, or something that's keep on happening. Then you have you try to provide a right feedback. The third thing is disturbing work habits. So what do you mean by disturbing work habits? So we all work as a team, and then you clearly see like there are habits within people, and that is completely disturbing the work culture. Then that's the right time to go talk to that person and give that feedback. The next thing is more about when somebody is not aware of what they are doing. When you clearly see there is a blind spot with that person, this person is not doing it wantedly, but sometimes he or she is not aware of it, then that's also a right time to go give them a feedback. Next, very, very important, and then pretty much happens to us whenever somebody sets an unrealistic expectation. So we should be able to give the right feedback with the right context. So that's also a time to give a feedback. And encourage, when you want to encourage somebody, when somebody have done a good job, then probably you should take time to share that feedback. Recency, so this is more about some event has happened recently. There is some occurrence, some situation that happened. You are observing that, so it's better to give that feedback right away so that people can remember that and then correlate towards the action. So whenever something is more recently happened, and then you want to share some information before people forget on what it is, it's better to set up a feedback session and then share that out. And last but not the least, when you feel like you have not spoken to the person for quite some time, the lack of some other works, or you have that lot of different projects that you have been, it's also time to take a step back and then spend some time to share the feedback. When you think like connecting with that person has been quite some time, and then you want to connect and give them feedback. So there are different ways, different things that you can look at to see when to give the right feedback. Alright, we saw like when to give a feedback. So now the interesting section is more toward how to give the feedback. So how do you give feedback? The first thing is whenever you have identified one of these events and when to give feedback, some event has happened, or there's something that you want to talk to a person. So always come prepared. So set a clear goal, like what should be the takeaway. Come up with a brief notes on what was your observation, and then more importantly, ask for permission. So keep the context in a way that are you open or are you interested to hear my feedbacks? I have something to say. So ask for permission to give feedback, so that it becomes a way that the person who is receiving the feedback doesn't put that to the safety security layer in his or her the needs, the pyramid that I showed, right? So when you ask for permission, people don't really think that is a threat or kind of a safety security thing. And then more importantly, tailor according to the style. So what do you mean by tailor according to style? Because some people might look for feedbacks or like the feedbacks in the style of like just having a coffee and then talking towards each other. Or some might need to have a formal email way of documenting things and what we discussed and what the feedback was about. So always ask for how would they like to get feedback, so that you can tailor that based on their needs. So these are very critical things: asking permissions and understanding their style, asking the permission, and then ask them like how they want to receive the feedback. So always when you think about how to give feedback, first thing is be prepared with these things. The second thing is don't label the person. So what do you mean by don't label the person? So always focus on the behavior, focus on what you saw, rather than trying to label the person. Hey, this person is arrogant. This person is is very directive. Or don't try to talk more about branding the person or labeling the person, rather than focus on what was the behavioral observation that you had, rather than labeling them. This is the second thing that's important while you going to share the feedback. Third most important aspect is excuse me, be specific to the point, be direct and open, because you have set the right context, you're asking for permission, you're tailoring the style, you're focusing more on the behavior. So now it's time to be specific to the point rather than running behind the bush, right? So it's always recommended to be straight, direct, open, then give that candid feedback by setting the ground right. So no sandwiching. So what do you mean by the sandwiching? Sandwiching is just to do some kind of a sandwich towards the straight directive feedback. Sometimes what we tend to do is we try to cover up and then give the real feedback out, right? So it's better to people when you call people for feedback, sometimes they might be aware of what has recently happened, and they might have some clue about that. So it is better to be straight, direct, open, and candid while you give feedback, rather than telling something to cover up and then give the feedback, because sometimes that really don't work. Make it participative. So when you ask for their opinions, views, and while you state your observations and what you saw, you can also ask for what do they think to get their perspective, so that the feedback session is participative and not just one person comes and then reads out what are the things that he or she has in her mind. So always make it participative. The next one is more about offer help and follow up. So when we provide feedback, when we provide it the right context, and when we are giving it direct and open, making it participative, it will always help if you provide some suggestions or offer some help on how you can get started with, either help the person, provide some follow up, or you can even also suggest some kind of an action, and then they can also pick the actions from that, and make sure that you show the care and empathize with them while we are showing direct and candid feedback. We should also empathize with them and then offer the help and support for any follow-up that might be requiring. Right. Last but not the least, you should always summarize, because sometimes when feedback sessions happen, it becomes a good debate, discussion, and for sure there is going to be a lot of emotions around it. So it's always better to end with a summary, saying that reiterating what are the items that was supposed to be given as feedback, maybe the goals, or what are the expected actions that a person should be taking, and close on a positive note, till a positive note towards expressing your confidence, and then thank them for listening to your feedbacks, and then express confidence such a way that the person will go and do that. Right, offering follow up, summarizing, and reiterating it will help the feedback to stick. Right, because as I said, it might be emotional when people have sometimes heated discussion. Good debates also sometimes might be emotional ground. So we shouldn't leave the feedback session without summarizing what are the key items that we have taken forward. This is more about how to give feedback, right? So giving feedback alone doesn't work, right? So we should also think about how we receive the feedback. When we are in the receiving end, what do we do, or how do we receive that feedback? I'll just quickly walk through that. So first and foremost, assume good intent. So whenever somebody is calling for feedback, asking for permissions, and then sharing the feedback, always tell to yourself and be mindful that you are mapping that to the higher layer of the pyramid and not the lower layer of safety and security, right? So that's more important. So assume positive intent, or else the feedback just becomes a threat, and sometimes we don't take any corrective actions, or we have that negativity bias, right? Always assume there is a learning opportunity. Blind spot could be with anyone. So be open when you hear inputs. Look at the Johari window, think about the Johari window, and then see like, yes, there might be something that others are looking at where I am not looking at things, and then assume that positive intent. So that's the first thing that we should interrupt in our minds. The second thing is more about avoiding this trigger. So what are these triggers? The first is wrong spotting urge. So what do you mean by this wrong spotting urge? When somebody shares a feedback, trying to be a bit defensive or trying to justify your view, may block the person in giving more detailed information about that. So don't, because that might be a little emotional. We might tend to urge, but we should be mindful to see like, are we listening more, or are we spotting the wrong urge, saying that trying to be defensive or trying to give, this is the reason why I tried to do this, or this is the reason why you are saying this, right? So rather than jumping to the wrong urge, just hold it. It's one of the triggers because that's how our brain works. So reduce the urge for it. So second thing that generally which could trigger us is who is this person? Why is he giving feedback? So who are you to give feedback? So that could also get in our way. It could be an easy trigger. So we should be always aware that excuse me, that feedbacks would help us to find the blind spot, and as long as it helps us to find the blind spot and helps us to improve, it's fine to come from anyone, right? So rather than trying to ask, why are you doing this? Why are you coming and telling me? So those things could be avoided while we receive feedback. The third important trigger is self-identity, which means why is it me? So why is he calling and talking to me alone? There are so many other people who are doing the same thing, but why me? Could be empathetical trigger that sometimes comes out, and then it's better to hold this type of thing so that it doesn't go to the safety security layer, because we are not jumping on it, or we are not questioning that from a threat perspective. And when you are clear about it's fine that it comes from anyone, and it's fine for us to understand our blind spot, then the feedback sinks in. So that's the way you receive the feedback. So first is give positive intent. Second is avoid these three triggers. So what are the three triggers? Jumping and that little bit becoming defensive and trying to challenge it immediately rather than listening it full. And then, trying to say like, why is this guy coming and talking to me about this? So those things could be avoided, right? These are triggers that could come up. And the next aspect is always show your ears, listen more, ask for more details, specific examples or patterns or specifics that for which you would be able to relate, and the person who is giving the feedback will also be interested to share more inferences or observations from it. And then he or she is also interested when you show the empathy for listening towards the feedback, they also share those instances and patterns. The next step is reflect and plan. So when you receive the feedback, it's also better to reiterate and then say like, hey, this is what my understanding is. Was this what the thing that you are trying to tell me? So that we are in sync. It's always better to reiterate, reflect, and then plan for the next steps. Right, and then also consider following up and saying like, okay, thanks for sharing the feedback, and these are the things that I'm going to act on, and then reiterating, saying that okay, was this the message that you wanted to communicate to me? And then also consider follow-up, which means talking to them, saying that okay, these are good inputs, let me work on this, and probably I might get back to you and ask your feedbacks to see if you see a change. So this way, the other person who is giving the feedback also has that confidence, saying that yes, there might be some good follow-up the person is taking it towards, and then willingly share, exchange informations. Right. So this is more about how to receive the feedback. So we saw like importance of feedback, challenges of feedbacks, and then when to give feedbacks, and how to give feedbacks, and then how to receive feedback. These are things that we need to closely connect, and that's how feedback syncs. Right. So we'll quickly see what are the do's and don'ts for giving feedback. So first is observations and not inferences. So what do you mean by observation? So it's more about you describing what you see rather than trying to draw inferences or conclusions, basically, not concluding. I'll just give a quick example. Let's say like for a sprint, there are two developers. One of the developer talks about a story, and then he says like, you seem to ignore non-functional issues, which is more about an interpretation that comes as an inference or a conclusion. So rather than this, the feedback could be like this. when you worked on a story, I saw that couple of non-functional issues were ignored. So there you are seeing like what you observed, what you saw, and you are not trying to say like a kind of a judgment or a kind of a conclusion. So whenever you give feedback, try to keep it to an observation level rather than a conclusion level. Second thing is descriptions than the judgment. So you are describing what you saw, and rather than being judgmental. Even in the good feedbacks that you want to give, that's still fine. In this example, let's say like a person presented something over the sprint review, and then they say like your communication skills are good, so which is fine, which is still a good feedback. But how it could have been done better is when you presented in the meeting that day, the clarity of thoughts and confidence was quite good. So you are describing what was happening rather than being judgmental, right? So that's another way of putting things into a perspective and then communicating it, right? So give feedback with constructive purpose only. So we already saw that it should help the person, and then it should be a dialogue such a way that it focuses towards continuous improvement rather than just throwing out the emotions. It shouldn't be that way, and don't overload. So keep it 2 to 3 specific areas. You are putting in so many items in, then probably towards the end of the meeting, it shouldn't be like people are left with no directions, right? So it's better to stick to 2 to 3 areas and then have some concrete plan of action with proper support from both the sides, right? So the don'ts is more about do not judge, conclude. Always talk from an observation perspective. Say what you saw, and then rather than putting it out towards judgmental or concluding that. Right. So always give the feedback in a constructive purpose. So these are the things that you shouldn't. These are the do's and don'ts. It's a simple way of putting that together. So whenever you are going to give feedback, always think this way: am I sharing an observation or am I sharing a conclusion? Right. So always move towards sharing an observation rather than a conclusion. Right. So I'll just reiterate this with a sample. Let's say like the same 2 developers are talking about a retrospective action for continuous improvement. So let's say like this is how they are talking. You are usually not interested in taking the continuous improvement task, maybe the retrospective actions, seriously, on which we are pairing, and this is not good. So if you look at this, it is more about inferences, conclusion, and judgment. So this is not good. It could be kind of a judgment towards that. So how this could have been done? We could remember this entire sequence with this 4 important things. So first you quote the situation so that the people understand from where this feedback is coming. You can say like in the last 2 review meetings on the CA initiative. CA initiative is continuous improvement initiatives, which is, let's say, like from the retrospectives. So this person quotes saying that from where it is coming. He talks about the situation, and then I have seen that you are discouraging me to talk about defining actions for those initiatives on which we have signed up together. If you look at this, it talks about I have seen, so which means sharing the observation rather than sharing the judgment. So I have seen that you are discouraging me is more about quoting a kind of a behavior and then how that behavior is affecting you, right? So situation, behavior, and the third thing is impact. So what is the behavior that is impacting you? Let's see this example. It makes me worried that I may be seen as going back on my commitments. Besides, this may lower the seriousness of the task within us. So this might lower the seriousness in case if you're not acting on the CA initiatives that the person communicates like, it makes me worried, and that's the impact it is creating. That's the third layer in which you can put the feedback into a perspective and communicate. First is situation, where this is coming from. Second is behavior, what you saw, and the impact is where it affected and how things are kind of getting impacted. And then also suggestion or next step. So before our next meeting, can you review our bandwidth and identify how much time we can help per week? So this also proposes a suggestion for improvement, saying that okay, so it's not just feedback alone, but the feedback that also talks about what could be the positive next steps. Right. So whenever you give a feedback, think in this perspective also, like what was the situation, what behavior did you see, and then how it impacted it, and then suggest you corrective actions, and then ask for what do they think. That is more important. That's how you make people participative in the feedback discussion. So when you share your situation, when you share your excuse me, the observations that you saw from the behaviors and how it impacted, and what are the suggestive next steps, it's also better to ask what they see, like what from their perspective, so that it becomes a participative discussion. Right, so these are the things put together from this framework: situation, behavior, and impact, and next steps. Right. So having said that, I'll move to the last section. So this is more about assessment of the feedback culture. So we talked about a lot of things about how it helps, how the feedback helps, what are the challenges, and then how to give feedback, when to give feedback, how to receive feedback, and then some kind of a framework in which you can deliver the feedback. But it's extremely important for us to assess the feedback culture, right? So only then you will be able to see where you're lagging. So this is a small 5-questionnaire thing that you can put for your teams or for your organizations. So I'll just quickly go through that. So let's say first is more about I'm giving, so this could be from the team or an organization, as I said. So I'll just read it out. So first question is more about I'm giving feedback with the right intent and context to my team at the right time. So in this, the score can be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So 1 is like I do it never, I never do it. 2 is rarely. 3 sometimes, maybe I'm giving right feedback with right intent and context. 4 is often, and 5 is always. So first is more about how am I giving feedback with the right intent and context to my teams at the right time. Second assessment questionnaire would be like I'm receiving feedback with the right intent and context from my team at the right time. So first is more about giving feedback. Second is more about receiving feedback, and all these things should be connected towards these scores. So each row item should have a score either from 1 to 5. Right. So second is receiving feedback. Third, most important thing, I'm asking for feedback from my team. I'm asking for feedback from my team. It could be never, or rarely, or sometime. So each of these things would have a score. So 1 means it is never, and 5 means it's always. The fourth is more about acting on my feedback for continuous improvement. So that's the key for the feedback to be effective, right? So hearing, giving, and asking doesn't complete the cycle unless people go act on the feedback, right? So am I acting on my feedback for continuous improvement is the fourth assessment questionnaire that talks about whether we are doing it from a scale of 1 to 5, how we are doing it. Last but not the least, this talks about the repercussion, retaliation things. So I'm getting repercussion, retaliation, or no action when sharing feedback. So this will have a negative score. So in case if it is more than 2, excuse me, so it will be more of a negative score. In case if it is happening rarely, then the score would be -1. And in case of the repercussion, retaliation, and no action is happening sometimes, then the score is -3. And then when it happens, when it's often, it becomes -4, and then when it is always, it is -5. So you have to total all these scores from for 1 to 5 questionnaires that we have, and as I said, the last one will have negative scores when it goes beyond 2. When you put this together and then see how the assessment works, this is how it could kind of look like. So whenever the score is from -1 to 10. Then probably this really the feedback culture is bad, and then we really need to act on it. When the score is the overall score, as I said, the score is not just for individual things. You have to sum the individual things and then see where this range falls into. Second is from 11 to 15. So if the score is between 11 to 15, then probably it might have some problem, but again needs some action. So when you have a score between 16 to 21, then probably it indicates the feedback culture is not a problem, and then there might be some minor improvements, but doesn't need to be an immediate concern. These are simple assessments that we can use for the feedback, maybe within the teams or within the organizations. Or you can also use this during your retrospectives. Once you have done with the retrospectives, you can simply use this to see how the feedback that we ourselves give within the peers, how effective it is, how are we acting on it, and then if there are any feedback culture issues within the team. So a simple assessment thing. There can be a lot other assessments that is out there in the market, but something this is simple that I came up with, and I keep using that with my teams as well as with my the larger teams that I work with, and it has given some good assessment scores, and it really helps for people when they themselves realize how they are doing it, particularly in these areas like never, rarely, or sometimes. Gives them a clue like how they are and then how they should be. All right, so this is the self-assessment. That concludes my presentation, and then we can open up for Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Ravi. We are opening up.
Question?
we also had comments coming in. So people like the do's and don'ts section and the sample section. They said they were very quite interesting. Will definitely help. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we are opening up our questions now. Just a reminder, please type in your questions into the question box on the left hand side. You'll find it as Q&A. So you can type in the questions there. Okay. Okay, so here I'll start with the first one. Okay, so there's a question. Will it work for Indians' mindset? We generally way far from getting direct feedback, at least what I've been observing.
Wow, fantastic question. So yes, it will work for Indians. To be honest, are you able to see my screen? I'm just trying to share something.
Yes.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, the Maslow.
Okay, so yeah, Maslow's hierarchy, right? So this is how it works. Yes, it will work for anyone who is able to be mindful, saying that, okay, the feedbacks are not going to get to the safety and security layer, rather I'll use it for self-actualization and self-esteem, right? Yes, it will work, but it takes time.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, the next one is, how can we be more open to give feedback across hierarchy? So this is asked by Rajan. Yeah.
Good question. So is this question more about, okay, so let's say like I have a feedback on my leader. So how do I go over the hierarchy, or I have a feedback on a manager. So how do I go and then share that feedback, right? Is that what the question is?
Yes, yes. Across hierarchy.
So first,
it could, I think the trouble part is upper hierarchy. Yes.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. So first thing is we should start this feedback culture from the top, right? So this is how I did. So I did this assessment within the managers first with peers of managers. Are they open to give and receive feedback? So only then the culture goes down, right? So if the manager is not comfortable to give a feedback to the director, then definitely a team is not going to be comfortable in giving a feedback to the manager, right? So this feedback culture, to be honest, it has to be, or it will be more effective if it is top down, so that the teams also, reflect that culture.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Yeah. Feedback retrospective is not welcomed in organizations. How to go about it?
Okay, so the feedback retrospective is not welcomed in an organization. So then probably we are going to have a dysfunction, right? So how do we go and then solve the dysfunctions, right? So that the question is more about if there is absence of trust problem, then probably we are going to have this issue, right? So first we need to see how we can solve the trust related things. So I would suggest to have a dysfunction assessment to find out what are the dysfunctions with the organization and then use the feedback mechanism to correct it. So similar to the feedback assessment that I had, there is also a 5 dysfunctions of the organization or of the team assessment, and then get started with that.
Okay. Oh, so here, what is the most difficult feedback that you had given?
Difficult feedback that you have given. All right. Yeah. Fantastic question. Yeah. So this is, I'll just give you a scenario that happened. I was part of one of the, I also do, coaching for managers and leaders. So as part of the managers discussion, so they were talking about the teams who are not continuously improving, they're not doing retrospectives, and they're not continuously improving on things they should be, right? So they were kept on talking about the teams, and then they had some valid concern the teams were not doing. So my feedback to the team was, to the managers and leaders were, are you doing retrospectives? Are you also acting as a team? If you expect your teams to go do that, you should be the ones who should be showing that out. So only then people will buy it from you. So unless you don't have it, then probably you cannot give it. So that's the kind of a feedback that I shared. But again, the room went completely silent. So I said, like, you have to do retrospectives. First, you have to improve before you go and improve or ask somebody to improve, right? So I know that this would this is a kind of a feedback, but I did not, to be honest, I did not deliver it in the right way. I just said like, you're not doing it and that's why your teams are not doing it. So I still remember that, I should have done it. This is a valid problem or valid thing that I'm saying, but the way that I said was not so good. And then, it became a more of a emotional discussion, so that I can remember, things that I did not do well in the first instance. And later then I was able to correct that and then see how to, build that trust and then, wait for the right moment to give the feedback in the right context. Then they were able to do, right? So now my management teams have their own retrospectives.
Okay. Thanks for sharing your personal, incident. Yeah. So next one is, okay, even knowing the dysfunction is visible, management won't pick the feedback culture. How to buy them in?
Okay, so good question. So we have to go with the facts. So in case if the management is not open for feedback, then or understanding the dysfunctions and not doing it right, we have to have them coached about this and what type of impact that it creates, and give them a message like this, right? Say, unless we have only happy employees can create happy customers, right? So this is something that each and every leader should understand. That's how I coach the leaders. Unless your teams are happy, your customers are not going to be happy, right? So you should talk in the terms of customers that they face or the revenues, so that they act on the dysfunctions, and then also look at the feedbacks that comes from the teams.
Okay, so how should the offshore development teams identify that a feedback is actually given by the customers, as mostly it gets lost as remarks or comments? So I think this points out to how to make the feedback visible as to from whom the feedback is coming from.
Yeah, so when it is in case of customers, this is more about net promoter score of that thing. If you're referring to those kind of things, then I don't think the name of the customer or from where it comes really matters. In my view, it's more about, is it helping you to find the blind spot? So that's how you can look at it. But again, we should have some kind of suggestions while people give feedback, right? So tell the problem, where it impacts, where it affects, and what is the impact, right? So setting some kind of a common format might help. So I also faced this kind of situation where we rolled out some survey asking for feedback, and then probably it was a lot of text, and we couldn't kind of get that out. So it's better to put it into a format. Like what is this, maybe like this, right? So give them what is the situation, it could be for the individual or it could be for the system, right? It works both ways. So what is the situation, and then what type of behavior you saw, and then what was the impact, and then what is that you think this system or person would have done differently, right? So general format would really help.
Okay, looks like more questions are towards making leaders realize the feedback culture. So here we have one more. Most Indian leaders don't understand this dysfunction and feedback culture. Any particular approach to be followed for them?
Yeah, so bring awareness. So the first step for continuous improvement is bringing awareness. So first thing is we have to make them aware on how, when the teams are kind of not acting on the feedback, and when the leaders and managers are not acting on the feedback, they are not moving forward, right? So they are going to move backward. So we have to say to the leaders on how it is impacting, right? So as I said, we should start this type of assessment right from the top, right? So unless they get it, it doesn't. There is no one silver bullet in a way that they can get it. But again, we should try to explain to them like how it is impacting. So unless when leaders don't act on things for improvement, the teams are not going to act on things that they can improve, right? So that's the way that we can talk to them, and then for a servant leader, they have to show the change that what they expect from others, right? So in an agile organization, the first thing that I ask the leaders is like, because sometimes it is misread, like agile and all those things could be for the teams and not for the leaders, right, or the managers. So it is the reverse. It has to be from the leaders and managers that they first understand what is servant leadership, and then as Scrum Masters or Agile coaches, we should be educating them, telling that how you expect from the team, you're supposed to role model that, and then help them out in finding it.
Okay. Okay, I think that also answers a couple of other questions. So moving on to something different. Yeah. Okay, here's one. When we seek feedback from our colleagues and genuine feedback, these are mostly over emails. How do we encourage the other person to share a true neutral feedback than a sugar-coated wordings to satisfy the colleague?
Okay, very nice. So we have something called thanks board or maybe a moods board in our organization. So this is how it looks. So for each team there will be a board that talks about that will have a hoarding saying that describe your day. How was your day? And in that aspect we will have smileys, the sad faces, and then indifferent face. So each of the teams can come and then describe how their day was. So this is just for a team to reflect on how things were. They just pick a sticky and then put it out. So that's one way of doing it. Second thing is the thanks board. In the thanks board, they can just come and put a thank you card. We also have something called kudos card, where the people can write good things about it and then put it out for their peers to be recognized. These are all peer-to-peer recognition towards the board. In case if it is a negative feedback, then better I would suggest like not put it on emails, rather than set up a one-on-one conversation and then talk. Right? The communication of good things can be in public, but if you want to have, as I said, like the situation and the connect is more important, right? So mails are not best things to it can help you from a survey and all those things, but if you have a specific feedback, it's more about talking one-on-one.
Okay, so I think we'll take a couple of more questions before we close. Please type in your questions on the left-hand pane. Okay, here's one. What might be a gamification approach to feedback for continuous improvement?
Fantastic. Yeah, so we can have visual or physical information radiators. We can have a big, information radiators that has, as I said, one of the things that is working well for us. So end of the day, the team comes in, they work on the sprint and they leave, right? So when they leave, they just they just take a sticker and then put it on the physical board to describe how their day was. So each of the day will have the motivation levels of employees, and then we have a culture here to see like the managers and the leaders. If they keep seeing 3 sad faces continuously for a day with the team, for 3 days for a team, then they are supposed to talk to them, sort it out, and then bring up the motivation level for the teams, right? So this is something that we can have kind of a gamification. A lot of other ways to do, but this physical board that talks about the sad, mad, glad phases, and then having some expectations around it. The Scrum Master and in our case, the Scrum Master manager is supposed to watch this trend, and this board is completely visible to anyone. So anybody can come and look at how the teams are. It's just to bring in some openness, transparency, and feedback culture day in and day out.
Okay. Now here is one more. How to make people realize their attitude issue and make them self-realize?
Good one. So as I said, go by specifics. So first ask them. So when they have attitude issues, it's better to ask them permission for giving feedback. So start with this and ask them, how we can share, how they would like to hear feedback. So always ask for permissions and tailor the need. When you clearly see the person has a strong attitude, go with that. That's the best way to start, and then see, and then go with the situations and observations rather than conclusion.
All right. I think I think we'll close with that. we pretty much covered most of the questions. Yeah. Ravi, is there anything else that you wanted to cover before a wrap up?
Yeah, so nothing much. Maybe this assessment. Anyways, I'll be sharing these slides with you. So we have to first assess where we are and then have an improvement plan, right? So I would suggest, in case if you want to do it for your teams or for your organizations or within the managers, if you want to do it, you can do that, right? So, and once again, thanks for listening into this presentation. Really appreciate all your questions. Hope.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Great.